We've handled impact assessments, stakeholders, and people risks. Now we're doing training and comms, and let me put this in context. We're doing this one because it's the most visible aspect of change to folks, so it's really important that we nail this correctly. It is also for many people leaders who are unsophisticated in the change process. Literally, this is change to them. They don't know about any of the rest of it. And then we're going to next time kind of lean into the more amorphous approaches and engagement stuff, the fun stuff in my world. And then we'll finish up with some governance, some change governance. But let's talk about it today. We're going to do some tools of the trade. We have a dearth of our go-to-market leads here because we're justifiably, this is their strong suit. This is what they've been doing for a while. So I think they feel confident. That's fine. Hopefully I'll be able to give even you guys who do this every day a little bit of ideas from my perspective as a change lead. We'll definitely, you know me, I'm going to double down on this is just how limited these tools are. And then we'll talk about kind of the building blocks, which is functionally stories and learning objectives, okay? Which is not a way that a lot of people talk about planning on changing on training and comms. So what? Training and comms. So it's the most visible and tactical piece of change, right? And the reason why leaders justifiably, I think, assume that change is training and comms is because it's what everyone sees, all right? And fair enough, right? And so it does mean that as somebody, even me, who doesn't think this is the most effective piece of the work that we do in change, it is important that you at least get it right. You don't have to be brilliant at training comms, but you do have to be decent, all right? We have here, Joel, for your background, and I don't think we have either of our vectors tonight. I think they have something going on, but we have a very interesting model here with the go-to-market team. They are an embedded group within our customer care area where their purpose is to roll out change functionally, and they do all the training and comms for those people. Right? And that's why a lot of them have been participating in these sessions because they want to expand kind of their understanding beyond that. It is obviously the thing that every single human being that goes through change sees. They'll see the messages you put out, and they'll see the training sessions that you run, and then they'll see all the artifacts that you've created as a part of building your training and comms. Okay? So you got to nail it. So I kind of have a question for you. Have you ever experienced a change where you really feel like this is the only thing that was done, and what was that experience like?
It's just been thrown at you.
Yeah, it's just kind of thrown. It's like you suddenly you get a comms message. Classic way this happens. You get a comms message that says, "Hey, we're doing this new thing, and you have to take training on Wednesday." And then you go to a 1-hour training session, and then Thursday they turn on the new thing. Sound vaguely familiar to anyone? Yeah. Yeah, it's what we've done to people a lot. Yeah, and for small changes, to be perfectly clear, for small changes, that's actually not a bad thing, right? Let's say you got a small pricing change, you know, or a change in a policy. Not a problem, right? If you go on hot desk, folks, you can't tell them on Monday that you're moving them on Friday to hot desking. That's just not going to work, right? Because you're asking for complete changes of behavior. So doing that kind of quickie approach is not bad. And one of those things for those change impact assessments is if you've got stakeholders of very low impact, this is probably all they need, right? It's your more significantly complex stakeholders that are problems. So I want you to focus your training in comms. The light touch stuff, you guys probably all know how to do quite simply. It's the more complex stakeholders, the ones that have the higher impacts that we really need to focus concerted energy on these two areas, right? How are we going to talk to our people and how are we going to upskill them? But I want you to factor into this where you are effective with these two tools, because they are just tools, right? Now, Joel, you haven't had my ADKAR lesson yet, but I'm going to kick it to you. But basically, it's just in a nutshell, ADKAR is something that ProSci developed as a change process. So it essentially says, first, to change, you have to first be aware of the change. Then you've got to want to change. Then you can learn how to change. Then you can practice it. And then over time, for it to be fully embedded, you have to keep reinforcing it. I'm going to remind you that my favorite metaphor is driving, right? My second daughter had lived in Wellington. So she had no awareness of driving. She could care less, right? She had no awareness that she needed it. She could drive, she could bus or walk everywhere. Then she moved to Auckland and the distances are bigger and the transport is shit. And so she had both an awareness of the need for a car and the desire to learn how to drive. Then she took classes in how to drive. If anybody's taken a class in driving, they know that taking a class teaches you how to drive, but doesn't teach you how to not kill yourself. Okay, caught her once going down a roundabout in the wrong direction. Okay, counterclockwise for a roundabout. So yeah, there's that. Ability is the practice, practice, practice. It's that 10, 20, 70. It's the 70%. You build your ability. That's the second A. And then the reinforcement is the example of Toast. I lived on a boat for 3 years. I was an outstanding driver before I lived on the boat for 3 years. How good a driver was I after 3 years of not driving? Pretty freaking shit. Okay, so this idea of ADKAR. Now I want you to reflect. Where would communications be useful as a tool for change in the ADKAR process? Come on. Okay.
At the start.
Yeah, definitely at the start, right? Definitely at the start. Potentially in the D. Yeah,
I think
you can
probably all the way through.
Yeah,
To be honest.
there's some argument to be made all the way through, but would you use the same kind of communication all the way through?
No.
No, you'd use a different model, a different channel. We'll talk about channels and different messaging, right? Because I mean, obviously you're going to tell somebody, hey, you need to practice driving if they haven't had a driver's class, right? So your message will change as you move people through the ADKAR sequence, right? Your comms channel, your frequency, the intensity, the author, the voice, whoever's talking, that's all going to shift over time. How about training? Where does training fit in?
Definitely.
Ability and reinforcement.
And knowledge, I think.
Yeah, so basically, you don't bother training anybody until you get to K. All right, there is a place to play for the artifacts of training in ability and reinforcement. This is where your artifacts of training are things like user guides, training manuals, self-help tools, quick start references. All those things you create to support the delivery of the knowledge can be useful in the A and R part of the change curve. After the project team shuts down and you walk away, you're going to leave artifacts behind, but you don't do training before you have awareness and desires. So you're going to start with awareness and desires where you're really going to try and build a comms exercise. KAR is where you're doing all your training, okay? So keep that in mind as you're designing your training plan. Then you can already see how your schedule of a training plan versus your schedule of a comms plan is going to be very different, reflecting on where your people are in their change process, okay? That makes sense with me? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. So let's dive into the role of communication. So build awareness and desire is where you find comms is the most useful in this process. It is first about getting people to be aware of the need to change, the organizational motivators, and you try to use your comms as a way of getting people excited about the thing, interested in the thing, engaged in the thing. Sometimes that engagement will be negative, but they negatively want to impact it, so they will participate. You basically use it as an engagement tool to drive people to pay attention, okay? You also use your communications to manage your stakeholder, the boundaries of what you're delivering, right? Stakeholders love to chat with each other in the absence of information. Right? So you're using your comms channel to kind of narrow the focus of that conversation to what you're actually going to deliver, right? You try to use these channels in a very specific way to get your leaders to not make promises they shouldn't be making. You try to get your stakeholders to not make assumptions about the thing that you're trying to put in, right? You also use it to reduce fear and uncertainty, because whenever you introduce a change that ruffles people's feathers, it stirs up the sediment, people get concerned, and you're going to use your comms as a way of like clarifying what's going on, reducing that, remember back half of the change curve, fear, uncertainty, doubt, the FUD, right? But then the front of the curve, remember, is about people gathering information so that they can choose their options. So you are also helping them prepare for future events and milestones, right? So if you think about the change curve, in general, comms is about all of it, right? Let them know it's happening, manage their expectations, calm their fears, and help them look forward to the future, all right? And yes, the final big category is you want them you need to cover your ass, right? So one of the things that as a project team you have to be aware of is that people will always try to say that you said you were going to do a thing or not do a thing. And then afterwards we'll try to say you said that. Right? This is a classic resistance tactic, right? You said you would do X and you did Y, right? And you're like, no, here's the comms where I said I was doing X. So yes, communication is also a way of documenting your way through the decisions that are made as a part of your project, whether you're a project manager or you're a CM. It is a cover your ass move, right? Here is our comms. This is what we promised. This is what we delivered. Okay. All right. So questions about that? Any challenges on that?
It's a really good point. I've never thought about it that way.
Well, the documentation.
Yes.
Yeah, you are documenting the process, right? And you're documenting it publicly. And this is why when we start talking about channels in a second, you'll see that steercos, governance, which we'll get into later, leader fortnightly news that I'm doing for our current Nexus project. These are all ways of documenting the history of the decisions that are being made, the choices that the organization has made over time. Right? Even when you change your mind, that should be documented in your public comms. Okay? Yeah, it's very key. All right. So, yes, Joel.
I was just going to say, just with managing leadership, as stop them over promising. Do you find the best way of doing that is by getting them, essentially getting the comms to come from them, like using them as a channel for that? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Or yeah.
Yes. Particularly your senior leadership who have decision-making capability over the scope of the project, right? If you get them to commit to a project that's twice the scope of your current budget, then you just say as the project manager, you just promised to a project that's twice this big. Where's the money? Right?
Yep.
Legitimately, are you sure you want to sign up for that? You just said you would give it to 100 people and we only have budget for 50, right? It's legitimately one of the channels that you would use, and it is a way of getting them to stop over promising. There's also a little game you can play when you coach leadership, and I'm thinking of adding a 9th class just about coaching, which is that leaders should start learning how to underpromise and over-deliver as a branding technique, right? Most leaders seem to especially senior leaders, like to overpromise and underdeliver, and they're quite ambitious in their promising when they look at a project. And really, for long-term brand within an organization, and in New Zealand, because we're basically the size of a pocket square, it's better to underpromise and overdeliver than people think. And then, naturally, everybody thinks you're amazing, right? So it's about coaching them into that understanding that better we say we're going to deliver 60% of what you want to deliver, and then we deliver 70. Right?
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Does that help? It's a good question. Yeah. It's a good question, right?
It was more like whether. Yeah, it's all good. Sorry, it's all good.
Yeah. No. It really get the leaders to define exactly what you're going to deliver, right? And then yes, get them to comms. In fact, let's talk about comms channels because I think this elaborates on what you're asking, Joel. So, what is a comms channel then? I first want to give you a definition for what communications is. Okay, so communications, right, is formally imparting knowledge, right? I've got this written down in this one. It's the imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium. It's kind of generic, but so a comms channel then is a very specific way in which you deliver a core message, okay? And it is really roughly bucketed into formal channels and informal channels, all right? And a formal channel is one, I've got the bullets here, but functionally, it's sanction governed, it has a source, it has a target, it has a function, and it's a push model, okay? So give me examples in your organization of a formal comms channel that already is in existence. Can you think of any?
Yep. So there's the performance and resourcing meetings, which is where all the team leaders get together and hash out their resourcing for the weekend.
Yep.
For the week ahead. Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. And that's good because you know what? A lot of people don't think of meetings as a form of comms channel, and they actually are. We have something here in the GTMs, they do heartbeats, right? So that's a meeting, it's a stand-up meeting with a customer care team. So yes, meetings are a form of formal comms channel. Anybody else have another example?
We have different types of emails that go to our CSRs.
Yep.
and laid out specifically in a way that they know what they're kind of receiving and whether or not their attention needs it straight away.
Yep. And almost every organization too will have a formal comms channel that's just obvious, which is the IT push notifications when something goes tits up with one of your systems. Like IT teams have mastered this shit a long time ago, right? So that's a Coral, it's an exact same example. It's like you have a very specific format. You've got visuals like breadcrumbing of visual feeds that are repeated and the like. So lots of examples there. All right, so what is an informal channel? So informal channels, sometimes they're sanctioned or not. So sometimes, like, you know, you'll have, let's say, an internal social network, like a Teams chat channel or something like that. They have almost no governance. They're distributed in terms of the control. The audience is random, right? They may or may not have specific functions. I've been looped into something called badasses, which is apparently the service value squad's way of exchanging memes and jokes, right? Like, so they're very informal. And people opt into them for the most part. So we can, you know, I just gave you an example of an informal, but this is also, you know, coffee cooler. They used to call it water cooler conversations. That's a classic informal channel, right? Can you think of an example in your organization or one that you participate in, an informal channel?
Oh, we have multitudes of team size.
Endless numbers of teams, yeah. Some companies have a mixed model on Yammer, right? Like Yammer can be used as a formal comms channel with specific groups, that are targeted and specific, whereas other groups are just random and uncontrolled, right? So formal versus informal. Okay, this is kind of a really interesting distinction, by the way, but it's valuable when you're in the change business to think about for yourself, well, which of these channels can I plug into? Okay, and there's some real issues about these channels, right? So is it going to go to my intended audience? That's super important. Like the channel may exist, like at Genesis Energy, Yammer is very underdeveloped and underused. So yes, the channel exists, but will it reach my intended audience? Probably not. It's probably worthless here, I'll be honest. Is it timely? So if I have urgent communications, is this the way I'm going to get to people? Do people consider the source credible, right? So I've been at organizations where a newsletter would come out from the comms function, but nobody read it. Why? Because it was worthless. It never actually meant anything to them on the ground. It wasn't credible because they knew the comms people didn't know what they were talking about, right? Will that particular channel be a companion to the thing you're pushing out, right? Joel's working on an intranet. So clearly he needs to think about pieces of the intranet as a formal comms channel for his intranet upgrade, if that makes sense. So it's a very complementary piece of way of getting your comms out, all right? And then can you get to it, right? So there are formal comms channels in Genesis that I can't access, right? More or less, Mark, our CEO randomly puts out a blog. I don't know why or when, and it seems to have no rhyme or reason. I'm not certain anyone's in control of it, but I certainly can't figure out how, if I needed to, I could plug into it. So can you access the channel? Depending on the organization, you may or may not have the ability to say, wow, yes, we have this weekly newsletter. No, I can't get my message into that channel. There's no real way for me to get that in. Or yes, I can work with the person and make it function for me, okay? So before you come up with a comms plan, you first have to figure out what's your infrastructure. What tools do you have in your organization, or do you need to use this project to build one? So functionally, what we've done for Nexus is we've created a fortnightly newsletter to our leaders that are within the team. Well, that is the proto of a comms infrastructure for customer care that did not exist. And if I have my way with you, Coral, it will continue to exist long after Nexus is done, and you will use that as the beginning of what I call a leader comms channel, which might be a fortnightly message from Tara and her equivalent in the other parts of the organization to team leaders on the things they need to be thinking about for the next fortnight, right? So that's how you start building new formal specific channels, okay? Questions on comm channels, formal versus informal? Good, okay?
Good.
All right, good. So what are you putting in? So basically, we talk about the structure, right? What tools do you have? And then now we say, what do you put into that structure? Okay, if you think of each of those comms channels as a glide path from you to your intended audience, what are you gonna say, right? So you're going to be telling stories, and you really need to nail down for any given project that you're putting in what core stories you're going to tell about the project as a whole. And each time you say something to somebody, you should be sending a specific message, right? Otherwise, it's noise. And in the 21st century, we have far more noise than we can consume. If you are not a credible source of information for people with valuable beats of information, they will start to tune you out quite quickly. Okay, so you have to identify, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? And am I going to say it in a way that's meaningful to my audience and it aligns with the way they think? Okay, so it's very valuable for our GTMs that they come from the community that they're talking to. It radically increases their credibility and also the choices they're making about language as they deliver this content, right? But you need to think about that. You need to have a very different voice. For example, if the CEO is saying something versus somebody who's in the business saying something, like you're going to use a different voice. One of the things I developed for Nexus, which is a classic idea, is you create a value proposition for your project, and you say, well, how would I describe this value proposition to the senior leadership team? How would I describe the value proposition to the janitor? How would I describe the value proposition to people who don't give a rat's ass about this, but care about the company and want to know why we're spending a bunch of money on this? Like, if you think about those are the same story told 4 different ways. So first, what is your story? What is the beat or the message that you're going to tell? And then how are you going to tell it? What voice are you going to use? Do not ever trigger a comms channel without reinforcing one of your central storylines, right? Because otherwise it's a waste of time. It really is. So even if I'm telling somebody that we're delaying the deployment 1 week, I want to make sure I'm reinforcing one of my key stories, right? So I'm going to find a way to weave that thread into the language. And for Connor and Teresa, that your challenge now is to go back and look at my newsletter that's going out on Monday and find the secret sauce of which story from our change approach I've actually beat. So there is a beat in that that's there. So they don't have to be in your face, but if you're always using that as your crafting guideline, it'll make sure you continue to tell your story. My favorite story, by the way, that I use everywhere is Eat Your Broccoli, which is the story, the understanding that you have to tell everybody something 7 times before they will eat their broccoli, right? Like kids, you get introduced broccoli 7 times and they'll stop spitting it out finally, all right? This is also true of messages. And so if you have a story that you're telling and you tell it over and over and over and over again in 50 different ways, eventually everybody gets the story. Okay? Question?
Yep.
That one's good?
Nope. Yep.
Storytelling. Excellent. Now, building the comms plan. Now, you thought I was going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm not going to tell you a lot. Basically, if you do any project management whatsoever, actually, once you understand your channels, which is your tools, and your purpose and messaging, which is your stories and your core messages, building the plan is just intersecting that with your stakeholder analysis requirements, right? This stakeholder is really important. I need to talk to them once a week. How's my best way to talk to them? I'm going to talk to them I'm going to go to their LT for 15 minutes, right? This stakeholder group, they're heavily impacted, but they don't care, and I'm not going to impact them for 4 months. So I'm going to give them an announcement, and then I'm going to come back to them as we get closer to the event. Like, you literally look at the channels you have, the stakeholder need you have, and you build a plan. You say, what am I going to do? Now, I really want to emphasize on this. There are 2 really key things as the CMPM you need to be keeping in mind at all times. Once you've figured out your channels and your access to those channels, is if the channel is owned by someone other than yourself, make sure that you engage with them early, often. That is one of your key stakeholders. If you don't have your comms manager on your key stakeholder list, add them now. So like anybody that you need to activate a channel, you need to activate now. You needed to activate them 3 months ago. Like, functionally, you need to be best friends with the comms teams or anyone else who owns an internal or external channel. The second thing I really want you to keep in mind as you build your plans is, this is one of those places where you want to underpromise and overdeliver, because comms is time consuming. So you can build a really ambitious plan, which would be an idealized world plan, but also always keep in mind the constraints within the team you have to deliver into your channels. If you commit to a fortnightly newsletter, make damn sure you've got somebody to write the fortnightly newsletter, because once you've started it, if it stops or it's a day late, you will lose the credibility with your audience, right? And you'll lose their confidence in the project deliverables that have nothing to do with the comps, because it will feel like, oh, these people can't even get their shit together to send out a newsletter, right? So make commitments that your project team can execute against. Don't make overpromise, definitely underpromise, and overdeliver if you can within the constraints of your team, okay? Super important. Questions?
No questions, but I absolutely agree.
Well, you do a lot of comms, right?
Mm.
Yeah, be careful on that one. Yeah, it's really easy to build a very elaborate comms plan with nobody to execute it. By the way, so the reason we're going in depth on comms and not training, since we're shortcutting training is a rinse and repeat. All right, fundamentally, it's all the same. Basically, though, it's when and where you're applying the training content, right? So comms content is a beginning of an education process, just as training is the continuation of a communications process, right? They really are just a continuum where they are on the ad car. What is the role? Provide the knowledge about the future state. Again, boundaries. You're setting boundaries in your training, what you're delivering and what you're not delivering, right? It's sometimes where the rubber meets the road. We had a stakeholder problem today in a training session where, surprise, the business owner's like, that isn't the way it's supposed to work. And you're like, dude, that is the way it works. That's classic, right? Training is yet another place where we manage our stakeholder understanding of what is actually being delivered. We reduce their fear and uncertainty. Virtually all of my training plan is not about teaching anybody anything, because frankly, people don't learn anything in training. I know that's going to be hard for you trainers to hear. I've been in the training business for 30 freaking years. I now know that people learn maybe 5 or 6 things during a training session, and the most important will be, where are the bathrooms? So it's legitimately not there. You're not really there to actually train. You do 10%. That's what I'm doing with you guys today. Right? I'm giving you the 10%. 20% will be if you go back to this content and you actually read the facilitator notes and you do the homework. And then 70% will be you guys going out and actually using these ideas to materially change how you implement projects, okay? So I'm here to tell you, don't be scared, right? That's literally all I'm here to do, is to do the thing you're doing, but do it better. Don't be scared, it's okay, right? And to give you some signposts on how to do it better. Again, training helps you prepare for events and milestones. So usually you're prepping them for like a go live or a beginning of the process, or, do the new thing, or start coaching in this new way, or using this new performance methodology, or whatever it might be. And then finally, yes, we use training materials to cover your ass. In this case, it is about the artifacts of change, right? So the longest legacy content that exists after you are gone and the project is gone are the artifacts that were produced as a part of the training delivery process, okay? So that will be your user guides, your reference manuals, your standard operating procedures, your FAQs, your intranet sites that facilitate, okay? There's another big category of thing that might get left behind in some projects, which will be long-term governance and sustainability and BAU. But this is the big one. This is the big kahuna, right? Probably like, I can't even percentage-wise it. Let's just say the majority of stuff that people have that they can use after you are long gone will be a product of the training content that you build. So when you're thinking about it, you want to think about how people are going to use this new process, this new tool, this new environment when you're gone, right? And the guidance you're giving, this legacy that you're leaving behind. And that is your way of covering your ass, because that should very clearly say what the process or thing or tool should do and what it can't do, okay? What are the boundaries for it? So yeah, again, covering your ass. Questions on any of those? Because, yeah, that all sounds really familiar, right? I mean, it really is the same. It's a continuum, okay? However, it continues with the next slide, formal versus informal training. So I already talked about this. Tell me, what would formal training look like? Give me an example.
Learning and development platform.
Yep. That's a nice tool. What else? E-learning.
Sorry, I'm just walking to my car.
Attend a class.
Like a yeah, attend a class.
Yeah,
Someone's
just go to class. Yeah.
practicing on a platform and
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we all know what formal training looks like. It's like, I've got an e-learning module. I've got a training class to attend to. I'm going to a workshop. It's structured, it's tracked. Usually you figure out who's been trained and who hasn't. By the way, I love this metric. How many people have you trained? Well, I've trained 9 out of 10 people. And you're like, really? You had 9 out of 10 people attend the training. You had 9 out of people sit next to Joe and have the answers fed to them while they went through an e-learning quiz, okay? You don't know for shit whether people know how to do the thing. You just know they've attended a training session. It's such a proxy for understanding things. It just drives me nuts. It's event-driven. Remember what I said, all this stuff is a process, and yet here we have events. Formal training is almost inevitably event-driven, focused. It is top-down and required almost inevitably. There's very few places in organizations where they have a really healthy or robust system of demand-driven training. Most of it is, you have to take this in order to do that. Narrowly targeted in content and audience, you usually don't have broad spread programs. Informal though, give me examples of informal training.
I've got a question on that one. Would a workshop fall under informal, or would that fall under formal? Because often they kind of veer off into territory that's not sort of as structured as like a formal channel.
I think this is such a valuable question. Unpack that, Joel, because what would the difference between a formal workshop and an informal workshop look like? Just pretend that those were two separate things for just a second. Let's do the abstract, physics in a vacuum with no gravity sort of exercise. What would a formal workshop versus informal workshop look like?
I guess a formal workshop would have set deliverables that you aim towards, focusing on, I guess, and maybe like a time commitment against each of those variables or something like that.
Yep. And an informal one?
I mean, yeah, not 100% certain. I haven't probably attended so many informal ones, but I guess that would be more of a brainstorming session or those sorts of ones.
Yep. And also, I think you really alluded to it at the beginning, is that what will happen is like a team meeting will devolve into an informal workshop to solution something, right? Some informal workshops are like, you just suddenly surface a problem and you're like, oh, let's go to this room and figure out how to fix it. That's an informal, but yeah, it's a really good way of thinking about it. And of course, we're not in space with no gravity in a vacuum. In the real world, they do blend. The training session that our DTMs had today had a piece of it that was sort of devolving into this, where they were solutioning a problem for something that wasn't related to the thing they were delivering, and they had to bring them back on track because it was a formal training session, and these people were attempting to informally workshop something else. And you're like, that's great. And that's actually really useful behavior. And we really want to encourage that, but not in my goddamn training session. Get out of here. Like, just shut up. But it's super useful. And ironically, by the way, for most human beings, a better learning model. Like those informal conversations, actually, we know from science, #science, people learn more, right? When they're kind of chit-chatting, it turns out that's actually a great way to learn things. Informal channels are always unstructured, spontaneous, usually self-driven. People wanted to have that conversation, so they tried to derail the formal training to have the conversation. I mean, that means there's passion, remember, awareness and desire. They're all ready to learn because they're off there solutioning this thing, right? They're like, yeah, let's do it. You're like, great, but annoying. Highly variable in topic, scope, and duration. You have almost no control over how these trainings take place. However, I want to dig into this a bit, because one of the most formal, informal channels that we have for learning is peer-to-peer sort of networks. When you get brought into a new role, you're often taught how to do the role by the people sitting next to you. That's not trained per se. That is, however, how you learn 70%, right? You're practicing and you're talking to the guy next to you. How do I do a thing? How do I find this thing? What tool should I use? Blah, blah, blah. So don't discount how much of the informal network. Now, I'm really going to go paradoxically, because to me, the fundamental difference between training and comms is that comms, I have a preference and bias towards using the formal channels wherever they exist, because it lends credibility. And for the same reason, I am biased towards informal training methodologies, because they are far less resource intensive for me as a change lead, and the audience is more impassioned, and the delivery model is more distributed, right? And also highly more credible. So like I am biased towards creating plans that create unofficially a formal informal channel for distributed information. And obviously a change champion network, which you may have heard of before, where you recruit people who are highly influential or they're social media influencers or whatever to be the champions of the change they're delivering, is simply a method of formally training a subset of your audience and having them informally train everybody else. Like, right? You see what I'm saying? That like literally is the definition of a blended model, right? So don't, I'm just giving you my biases so that when you read the facilitator notes, you know where I'm coming from. And the paradox here is I have been an instructional designer and a trainer and a facilitator for 30 years. I have never been a comms manager, and yet I am preferencing formal comms versus informal training. You know, it just is the way it is. But that's been my experience, okay? So again, just like with comms though, rinse and repeat. You have to evaluate the channels that you have. First, do an inventory of what do you have available to you as an organization. How accessible are those channels to you as a PMCM? Okay, can you use them? Do they reach the intended audience? Is it going to happen in a timely fashion? Do you have capacity, not just as a resource team delivering the content, but in your audience? Will you be able to get their time and attention for this learning? All right. Most importantly, does it equip your audience? We're going to get to this one in just a second. And can all of your stakeholders, irrespective of the position they come from in terms of how they preferentially learn, participate? Do they have a methodology of getting there? Especially in this one, we really have to think about those parts of our community that engage with learning in different ways and content in different ways. Visual, audio, and kinesthetic is the most obvious old school way of thinking about this, but this is just this idea. Some people like reading, some people like talking, some people like hands-on. You kind of want to think about that, especially if you've got a really big chunky thing that you're putting in. Okay? So it is the same thing, but different. Same, but different. The facilitator notes are quite detailed on this one, like much more so than I usually do. So really, you got to read this. Just as we had core messages and stories in the context of guiding what you do and when you do it with comms, the real objective within the context of training is learning objectives, and you want to be specific about what thing you are trying to drive through your training. Okay, and let me be really clear. I have tried to model these the entire time that we've been together, right? Every single lesson I start with has a learning objective series. Like, this is what I'm going to try and make you do. And you want to make it an active statement. There needs to be a verb. There needs to be a subject. I cannot be more specific, right? By the end, you should be able to do this thing. Okay, what is the thing? Your learning objectives, you can't teach very many of them at the same time, honestly. You can break them down into little bits and bobs, but basically you want to be really, really clear. I got 3 or 4 learning objectives for this session. This is what I need to get across, right? It's going to inform how you deliver. Like, if you want to teach somebody how to drive, you cannot do it without a car, right? Like, this idea that you can learn how to drive from a book, that's not going to work. So know what your delivery model needs to relate to the learning objective. Right? It helps you in your instructional design. If I have 3 learning objectives, I could probably get it across in an hour. If I have 50 learning objectives, I've got a months-long course, right? It addresses your gap, your performance human gap between your current and future states. That's a fancy way of saying, what shit do they need to know? Right? And understand that the closer something is to a physical, this is really weird. It's like the rule of raw and vegetables. Like the closer the food is to raw, probably the healthier it is. The closer something is to a physical, tactical task, the easier it is to train. The farther it is from a tangible task, the more difficult it is. Okay, so you have to give the people absorb it over a longer period of time. Okay, if you're going to do training, if you're going to write anything, SOP, FAQ, glossary, whatever, it has to you literally have to say which performance objective, which learning objective does this tie to? Otherwise, it's a waste of your time and theirs, right? If it's not achieving your objectives, you shouldn't be delivering it. Full stop, just stop. It might be in the tool, but why are you telling anybody about it, right? Like, this happens all the time. And I get trained on how to change my status in Outlook. I'm like, why the freaking hell would I care about that? Nobody looks at status in this company. This is stupid, right? So, like, seriously, Focus on the things that you must deliver. Okay? All right, and then same, but different. A training plan is the intersection between your stakeholder analysis, the needs of your stakeholders to change themselves, your project schedule, what you have available to you, and your learning objectives. Just put them together, okay? And again, under promise, over deliver. You are going to be seriously resource constrained. I got to tell you, training is literally the most resource intensive task that you will deliver for your project. Is without question the most expensive thing we deliver in change. It is not, however, as I hope I've made the case, the most useful. It really isn't. Like, it doesn't change people. For the most part, people don't change their behavior. For the most part, a training session doesn't actually get people very much farther forward. Can you avoid doing it? Probably not. Most of the time, you still need to have some form of training. But it is only a very small piece. So that being your understanding now, I hope that you will think about, from a resource allocation perspective, over your time in a project, how much should I really be investing in this training content? And how much maybe I should shift some of my attention to core messaging. Maybe I should shift some of my attention to leadership coaching. Maybe I should shift some of it to stakeholder management, right? Because those are more effective tools, frankly, than the training piece, even though the training piece is the most visible. You with me on all that? All right. And if you have a channel, a formal L&D channel within your organization, or a formal learning and management system, engage with the owners of that channel early and often. If you have training rooms, find out who owns the training rooms, the training resources, take them out for lunch, give them a little wine. Yeah, so again, co-opt the people that own the channels you might need in order to deliver your content. And put training companies on speed dial if you've got big projects, because you're going to need extra resource, right? One of the most important reasons, by the way, to bring a change manager into a big project very early in the project is so that the original budget is scoped to include a big training budget if that's going to be needed, okay? Because it's the most expensive thing that you produce as a CM. Questions on any of that? Okay, so. When in doubt, when do you need help? Well, I mean, the obvious one is that you need the L&D and comms people, and we've already kind of covered that off. You usually want to, get a change consultant. If your PMO has like a change consultancy model, ping them if you're having any trouble figuring out your learning objectives or storylines, right? Like if you're trying to figure out what stories connect to. And if there's a long, complex training program, and I also should have put down, if somebody tells you that you need to have a culture change, engage it just on all of those. Let's just, if anyone uses the word culture, just immediately go to your change managers in your company or call me immediately, because anytime it touches culture, the first thing you got to do is take all the helium balloons and pull them down off the ceiling. Because like, man, the leaders all float up to the top and they're talking in squeaky voices up there, and you just got to pull them all down and get them to be more real. So yeah, so those are when you're going to want some change help. But the others in comms and training really have to do with comms and training expertise. If you can find it within your organization to help you to scope it, and more importantly, to help you with that channel identification. What's available to you? How do you access it? When can you use it? What permissions do you require? And what lead time? Like a lot of comms channels, for example, you need a 2-week lead time, which means you want to put out a message on Tuesday. Good luck, right? You can put out a message into that channel, but not this Tuesday. It'll be 2 weeks from Tuesday. So you have to plan for all of that, right? Okay, questions? I still am on track, you guys, with the timing. All right, so excellent. That's comms and training. So of course, what do you have to do? You have to do a comms and training plan. I put a prototype of training and comms, a simple training and comms plans, into that change planning toolkit. I don't ask necessarily that you build these, especially your GTMs. You've done this before. Joel, I don't know if you've ever written a training or comms plan. Pick one and start sussing it out. I think for the intranet, you're probably going to have a training plan. You could start sussing out what that looks like. The model there will give you some framework. If you need something more elaborate than that, let me know. I do have lots of training plans, prototypes that you could look at, okay? Mm-hmm. All right, as usual. The real homework on this one, I think, because I'm really stuck up about this. I just reread my facilitator notes on this, and everything I said today, I said much, much better in the facilitator notes. So please, this time, if you haven't done it before, read those. But I also, as usual, provided you with some links of additional reading if you're more curious. I think the examples of a good learning objective was really pretty good, even though it's from yourdictionary.com. I have no idea why it's there, but anyway, it was kind of interesting and I enjoyed it. And how to create an effective training program for convergence training was a nice little article. I liked that. Okay. I don't know why, but that communications channels article from the Health Foundation was also quite good in just describing channels. So I found some weird ones this time, but they are kind of interesting and I think support what the case I've been making. All right. I think I'm going to, I also included, by the way, you want to play with this, you can. I was noodling on, like, if I were running this in person, if I could put my channels of, like, what would be useful. This is fun if you want to. What channels do I have available for me for training, and where would I put them? Like, what kind of things I could do. Just a start of 10, an idea. You can throw that up on a board and sticky note the hell out of it and intimidate everybody. That's another idea. Pulled this straight out of my communications as a process, not an event. Joel, you've never seen this one before. The other team have. Just like different kinds of event versus process styles of communication, right? You see, I was in a mood. I was throwing all kinds of slides into this one. I had a lot to say about this topic, so it's a really very, very dense pack. All right, let me turn off the share.
I was just going to say, I had a potential question around credibility.
Okay.
So. I guess one of the biggest things is if you get a lot of messaging from leadership or from the same sorts of people who are, you mentioned last time, whether they're your de factos or your
de jures.
Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah.
Either of those two, if you continually get messaging from that area, it kind of often feels like it can turn into a white noise moment for people. How do you, if you are needing leadership, de factos or de jures to communicate these sorts of messaging quite frequently, how do you minimize that white noise effect and maximize the credibility of what you're trying to portray across?
So this is a stakeholder kind of management problem, right? What you need to try to do is take your noisiest communicators and sort of gather them together and go, hey, guys, first you establish the WIFM. Like, I see that you're all talking about this thing. That's probably a lot of extra effort on your part, right? Like, we've got a lot of people kind of saying similar things, and I have a feeling I'm wasting your time having you all do this, right? There's the WIFM. How about instead we kind of picked one of you to be the spokesperson, or we just said, I'll give you the message and you just do your people, if you all go from the same little core message idea, this message pack. Does that make sense? So, but when you're dealing with leaders like that, they're enthusiastic. You don't want to curb their enthusiasm, but you first put it in the context of you're helping them save time and energy, not in the WIFM for you, which is just shut up. Just shut up. You're driving people insane. That's your WIFM. They're not interested in that one. Put it in their context, okay? I'll give an example of how we did that at HealthSource, actually. We had all the leaders wanted to have leader comms. I said, well, we love your enthusiasm, but that's so much work for you to put that comms out. How about we have one leader per week, and we'll rotate, and we will help you when it's your turn with what general topics you need to cover, and then you can cover your personal topic and you can save them up. There's 5 of you, that's about once a month. That seems like plenty, don't you? And they're like, oh yeah, that's great. And boy, that shut them all up. It was great. And it also channeled their communication so that we could edit it and formally drop in the messages that we also needed to beat, the beats we needed to hit. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
So whenever you're dealing with those kinds of engagements, start not from your perspective, but try to see if you can help them, be helpful to them by getting them to stop doing the thing that's driving you nuts, right?
Very Machiavellian, I like it.
Oh, hey, you know what? Like, people think I'm fuzzy and teddy bear girl. I'm really just a stone cold bitch. I really am. It's all about getting the max out for the minimum effort, right? All right, any other questions or ideas? Sylvia, how about you? You've been real quiet through this session. Sylvia?
No, sorry. Just listening and taking it all in. Yeah.
Okay, good. No questions, we're good. How about you, Coral? You okay? Are you now in the car still? Where are you? Oh, I think we may have, Coral was driving in and out, so I don't know if we're good. Teresa, you good?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right, so the usual.
Yep, I'm good. Just pulled you out of my pocket and found the mute button. So yeah, no, I'm
Oh,
good. This
wow,
is
I don't
really
know.
valuable. It just reinforces a lot of what we already know, and
Yeah.
things
I
to
figured this
tackle,
session is a bit redundant for you guys. The pieces that I'm hoping we're driving into is it rebeat at that story, the idea of stories and the idea of learning objectives, because training can sometimes feel like we're doing inventory of all the tasks as opposed to what is our learning objective. So that's the real caution for you guys. I've seen a little bit of that. I'm not trying to be critical of Connor and Teresa, but I see a little of that in the lesson plan that they have. And it's very easy to slip into. You think of all the tasks someone needs to be able to accomplish, and you're like, oh my God, it's going to take forever to train them. And you're like, really, do I need to teach them all the tasks? Maybe I don't. What's my learning objective? What do I really need them to be able to do on day one? And what can they explore and figure out on their own? And
I really like that the thought process of where am I most valuably going to spend my time.
Yeah, concentrate your efforts, right? Paradoxically, Coral, it makes you more effective also because of the white noise that Joel's talking about in general, not just about your specific topic, but if you multiply that times the 10 initiatives that are in flight at any given time, and they're all pumping out massive amounts of noise, how do you clear the clutter? And that makes each piece of message you make more important because you're putting out less, but it also makes it more probable that people will engage with it because it's more credible. Right?
Yeah. And to your point, we're absolutely stealing the templates and things that you've started creating.
Yeah, yes, Joel, you'll love this. We don't actually have any formal comms channels here that I can figure out beyond these email templates and heartbeats. I mean, like the corporate comms team, like with all due respect, Genesis people, I'm not clear what they do for a living because I asked them what their comms channels are and they don't actually have an answer. If you have comms people in your organization that cannot answer that question, literally blindfolded upside down and after 3 beers, they are not actually helping you. That's my assessment. That's my candid assessment. Comms people should always tell you exactly, they should be able to beat by beat tell you exactly what 5 channels they have. So your formal comms people, I've talked to not just, what's her name, Holly? I think her name was, well, yeah, the one that does our comms thing with, and one of them at the headquarters team, and I'm like, they don't actually articulate in that way. And I'm like, oh dude, okay. Just do over, start from the beginning. Yeah, so like same thing with your L&D teams, right? You ask them what their learning management system is and they don't have an answer. You've got a problem. You've got a problem.
We're getting a new one of those.
Okay, Carl, I hate to depress you, but when I was here in 2013, we were getting a new one of those. And the one you have right now is the one they told me.
The third one.
Yeah. Okay, good to hear. All right. Anything else before I send you guys off on your merry way? No, we're all good?
Yeah.
All right. As usual, I love spending my time with you. Thank you very much for your attention. All right, I'll stop the recording.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no worries. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.
Cheers. See ya.